I am the Highland Scribe. Scribe to the stones, to the winds, to the bloodlines that walk unseen. Come closer, closer still. You see, the fire's warm. But this tale tonight, well, this tale runs wild. Now, there are rules that the road keeps. You see, afore there were hooses, afore there were roads, afore there were fences everywhere, there were paths that were worn down by feet that never stayed still long enough to call one place home. And if you walk those roads, now I mean properly walk them, not just pass through, you learn early that the road, well, she keeps her own set of rules. Not laws, no, not commandments. Rules. Rules you follow. Not because you were told to, but because you've seen what happens to folk who dinna. You dinna turn your back once you've crossed water at dusk. You dinna sleep where one kind of ground turns into another. And you dinna count your footsteps, at least no at night time. And after dark, well, in my folk, the way we were taught, after dark, when the last bird has settled, after the light goes thin and blue, after the world has decided what it will hide, we were told you do not whistle. No even to keep your courage up, no to pass the time, no because you're happy and your chest is full of song. You dinna whistle on the road, you dinna whistle near the trees, and you dinna whistle where the dark can hear you. It isn't because you'll be heard, it's because something's already there, waiting. That is the rule. And like all good rules, it was learnt the hard way. Now you see, the gathering had been planned since spring. Word had gone along the roads that passed hand to hand and mouth to ear, the way that it had always been and always had done, a meeting of the Knockin folk, in a hollow that had always held such meetings, longer than anybody living could remember, not marked on any map worth trusting or on any calendar, not named aloud unless you already kent the way. By the time the first fires were lit, the place, well, it already felt full. Wagons were set back from the trees and horses were tethered close by, close enough to smell one another, and the dogs were lying with their heads on their paws, eyes half-lidded, but their ears cocked and listening. The kind of gathering where no one speaks too loud after sunset. And it's not because they were afraid, no, but because it just wasn't done. Now, here are the three brothers. They came in together, as they'd done many times before, and just before the night had settled in properly. Willie walked in first, broad-shouldered and steady, the sort who took up space without needing to prove anything to anyone. Duncan, the middle brother, he followed. Eyes were always moving, the kind who noticed when the birds went quiet or the wind sort of would turn sharp. And behind them came their youngest brother, Peter. Now, Peter had just turned 18. He walked light. I wouldn't say he was careless, never that. Light, like the ground was something he expected to answer him kindly. He had a tune in him most days. Always a a hum when his hands were busy, or a bit of a song when he thought nobody was listening. And sometimes, when he forgot himself, or when the world pleased him more than usual, he whistled. It was never loud. It was never in a mocking sense. It was just there, like breath. He'd been warned many times by his mother when he was small, by his uncles and his cousins as he grew up, and by his brothers more than anything, quiet and serious, when they were alone. After dark, you keep your mouth shut. After dark, you listen. Peter nodded when he was told. He always did. He just couldn't keep it. That first night, after the camp had settled in and the fires were burning low and just right, you see, Peter took a sack and had went for wood. It was just a wee bitty longer than expected, but nobody really worried. The woods there were old friends to the travelling folk, and they heard him before they seen him. It was a whistle, clear, wandering and easy. It cut through the hollow like a knife through cloth. Oh, every voice stopped dead. Even the dogs lifted their heads. Someone hissed his name. No loud, just sharp enough for... Peter was already stepping into the firelight, and the tune was still riding his breath like it belonged there. All of a sudden, hands caught him, hard like. An elder took him by the collar and dragged him off before the whistle could even finish itself. There was no shouting, there was no scene, just firm, certain movements. He was pulled into a tent, set a little bit apart from the others, where the fire burned low enough to keep the shadows thick. As Peter glanced around, the faces were familiar. He'd kent them all his life, though he could never have said how old any of them were. Some had lines like weathered bark, and some had eyes as sharp as flint. No one was sitting. "You're no meant to be doing that," one of them said. "We're no angry. It was worse, they were more tired." Peter shrugged, half smiling. "I was just..." "No," another voice cut in. "You were calling is what you were doing." That made him laugh, a short bark of it, sort of surprised. "Calling what?" They did not answer that. They just watched him. And instead, they told him about the old thing. They told him that the dark is no empty. They told him that night does not scatter sound the way that the day does. The night gathers it. It holds it and passes it along like a message. They told him that there are hunters that dinna chase, that do not breathe hard, that do not show themselves, unless there is need to. They told him whistling was never meant for night, and that it would sound like a signal to anything listening, for one thing. That some things do not make their own noise, because they simply just do not need to. Peter, of course, listened, mostly. He shifted his weight back and forth and smiled when he thought he should do and looked respectful. "Man, bairns' stories," he said at last. "You tell them to scare the young ones, so they'll do what you think is right." One of the elders stepped close enough. that close that Peter could smell the peat smoke in the old wool. 18, she said. You're old enough to ken better, old enough to be taken proper. Peter again just looked and he laughed, but this time it was louder. Taken by what, exactly? A shadow. Her voice never rose. By whatever decides to answer your call. And if I dinna stop, he asked, half challenging, kind of half amused. Then that's your lookout, laddie. 'Cause let me tell you this, it'll no take the noise you keep making. They let him go on his way after that. The firelight kind of felt a bit different when he came back. The music had gone thin, and his brothers looked at him without asking. Peter only shrugged. A month had now passed. Mornings do that. You know, they settle for a bit, and then they kind of slide off when nothing arrives to prove that they're true. The brothers went hunting together, the way that they had done thousands of times before. The land was familiar, though no land is ever the same twice, of course. They took what they needed from the land, and no more. The day was clear, but the woods were thick, and the light faded early on this day. Shadows began pooling in the low places, and the air became cold enough to bite. Peter fell behind. No far behind, just enough to be alone with his own thoughts. And then he began to whistle. Of course, it was just a little at first. Willie, obviously hearing him, turned around sharp to his brother. Would you stop that, man? You've been telt. Peter grinned and broke into song instead, low and tuneless, like it was all the same thing. Duncan cursed him under his breath. Hyman, we mean it. Stop. And they walked on. Now, the light had begun thinning further, and the path was now narrowing, where the roots rose like knuckles through the soil. And a little later, the whistle came back. Although it was a wee bit quieter than it was before, almost like Peter was being careful not to aggravate his brothers. Willie turned, his mouth open, ready to shout. And the sound stopped dead. No trail away like before. There was nothing. The woods felt wrong. Something changed. The birds were not there. The wind had gone. Even the leaves, they seemed to hold their very breath. Peter, Willie called, thinking his brother was taking the mick. Nothing. No sound. The two brothers searched until the dark pressed close enough to make sense again. They called his name until their poor throats hurt. They found no tracks, and to them as hunters it made no sense. No broken bushes, no sign of a struggle, no even a drop of blood. Nothing. At first light they came back with others from other camps, and they searched the streams and the gullies and the trees. Days passed, and then weeks passed. Still there was nothing. Only one thing remained. On a stone, near where the sound had ended, there was a mark. It was narrow and deep, like something had been leaning in close, not to strike or attack, but perhaps to listen. Peter was never found, and so the rules are kept, you see. You dinna whistle after dark. You dinna sing to the night. And you do not give the road your voice when you dinna ken who walks it with you. You see, some things, well, they don't always make their own noise, but they wait patiently, quietly, for you to answer them. And then they come, because that is the rule. And now you know why. I am the Highland Scribe, scribe to the stones, to the winds, to the bloodlines that walk unseen. And until the candle lights again, sleep tight, wanderers. And perhaps dinna be whistling in the night.